I thought that if I did this and this and this and I was faithful, well, God would show his blessings. And I thought, what would happen, Marty, if instead of your stupid foot, if this was Becky having a difficult pregnancy, you couldn't even provide for her? God's not providing. You've got to do something.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Okay, so my guest today grew up the oldest of 9 boys. He was married at 19 years old and has been married for 29 years now. His wife is a graphic designer. He works as an IT developer. He likes hiking, the Seahawks, plays a little guitar, and is a science enthusiast. He also is a board member with Sunday Assembly in Olympia, Washington. He and his wife have 2 kids in their early 20s. Their daughter graduated college in 2016, and his son entered his junior year of college in the fall. It's my pleasure to welcome Marty McDonald to the podcast today. Marty, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Steve.
So how long have you been hiking, Marty?
Oh, well, I've always liked to hike, but I mean, maybe it's been officially, maybe 2009 is when I joined the Olympia hiking meetup group. I'm not with that group right now, but I was able to do some hikes with them and was even an assistant organizer. And we just, what I mostly like to do is day hikes. I have yet to get out there and go overnight, deep in the woods. I'd love to do that, but
oh, cool.
Just meet up with people at an agreed upon spot, maybe 7 a.m. in the morning, go, on the drive, get the trailhead and just enjoy what's out there. I mostly go for the scenery and stuff. And then we usually have a bite to eat on the way home, and it's a really good way to spend a day.
So you had said that you consider yourself, you used to consider yourself agnostic since about 1996, and then since 2011, you consider yourself atheist. So tell me why you prefer the term atheist now to agnostic.
Okay, well, I remember thinking that there could be possibly something out there, and I remember I was thinking to myself, I had always thought all along, yeah, there's some force out there. There's something that kind of holds things together, that keeps all the laws of everything in motion, And then I decided to play an intellectual exercise. I thought to myself, what would happen if there absolutely was no God? So I kind of took the seatbelt off of my thoughts for just a minute and kind of played with that. And I thought to myself, well, if there absolutely was no God, there would be some things that would be totally random. Good things would happen to good people, good things would happen to bad people, bad things would happen to bad people, bad things would happen, there would be no rhyme or reason for things. Other things would make sense. There'd be beauty, there'd be terror, there'd be fairness, there'd be unfairness. Some people would live to be 105, others might live maybe for 5 minutes. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's exactly the world we live in.
Wow.
And so I realized this doesn't prove that there's no God, but it's enough for me to conclude there very most likely just isn't a God.
So it was that thought process that you kind of went through to kind of evolved from more of an agnostic to, gosh, this world looks exactly the way it would if a God didn't exist. Exactly.
It wasn't a big giant flash of light or, using a biblical metaphor. It's not like Paul getting knocked off his horse. It was just kind of a gentle, oh, I guess I'm an atheist.
Yeah, that's interesting how that happens, because probably years ago when, now you were Catholic, right?
Yeah, and I also was evangelical, but we can get into that later.
Yeah, years ago when you were Catholic, the thought that you'd be atheist someday is like this huge leap, but over time you go through kind of that agnostic phase, and then it just becomes at the, that last little step is not such a leap anymore once you've kind of, you've gone through this process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To me, it wasn't necessarily even taking a step. It was just simply stopping and looking around. And I was already there. I just didn't really stop to really turn the lights on and look.
Take that final thought, I guess things do look exactly the way they would if if a God wasn't controlling it all, you know?
Exactly. And it kind of goes along with how my whole journey was. I feel that there was never really a big giant moment, but there was a series of milestones, however.
Hmm.
So while I did, it was kind of a gentle, oh, I guess I'm an atheist back in, I'll just say 2011. There were, in fact, milestones that I did have that do stick out in my mind. And we could talk about those
Yeah.
if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and start with just like your kind of your Christian origins, or what in what ways was Christianity a part of your childhood growing up?
Well, my parents were very, very Catholic. My dad, they were both born in the late 40s before Vatican II. Vatican II was a process in the Catholic Church where they decided to modernize some of the things about the liturgy and so on, and some of the thought kind of changed as well. But my parents were pre-Vatican II, and so they were brought up with a um, very strict, very, I guess, old school Catholicism, and that's how I was raised. Um, a very strong devotion to Mary, a lot of reverence for priests, um, treating the Mass, the Catholic liturgy, with utmost reverence. But they also believed a lot of superstitious things, all the things that, oh, I guess it's just this side of voodoo, sort of. I mean, they
Yeah.
believed a lot of those things. So growing up, it wasn't all bad. There were, I remember the Angel of God prayer before bedtime. A Bible story, picture books for kids, books of saints. As a Catholic, we all had our books of saints. Um, I became an altar boy in the fifth grade. I was an altar boy up into high school. I was even a Eucharistic minister. That means passing out Holy Communion a few times in my senior year. I even did the readings. Some of it, though, wasn't. Well, I enjoyed being an altar boy. That was a lot of fun. There was a lot of camaraderie with a lot of the other boys, and we had a lot of fun doing different things, camping trips, and helping to, work around the church and clean things up, and that was kind of fun actually. But there was kind of also a very strict, way about it, where every night we'd get on our knees in the living room floor praying the rosary towards the mantle on which was a statue of the Virgin Mary, and it was very, expected to do that. And, it was all very, very real. It was not just go to church on Easter to pick up the umbrella you left there on Christmas. We were
Yeah.
there all the time, participating in all the strange nooks and crannies of Catholicism that a lot of people don't even know about. Holy days of obligation. Um, I knew a lot about Catholic theology. Then I think, by the time I was in maybe eighth grade, than many Catholics in their adulthood even know. So
Wow.
it was pretty immersed.
A pretty devout family, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And you said there was an angel prayer at night. What was that?
Oh, it was just a angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here. Ever this night be at my side, to light, to guard, to rule and guide.
That's amazing that you still know it.
Oh yeah, and it's a nice prayer. My mom taught me that, and it's a nice memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up believing in like guardian angels, so that's what I thought of as a child. That's kind of something that was in my mind. Like there's a special warrior angel thing, that's like guarding my bedroom from bad demons who want to attack me or whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah. And that talk of demons is I hear you. My wife grew up. She was literally afraid of demons. I won't get into all her stuff
Oh,
here, but
that's okay.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's weird and bizarre as children to know that we were afraid of demons. And that's where I start to shake my head.
Yeah, that's true because it goes from like, oh, it's this harmless belief that makes you feel good to, no, that's actually doing psychological harm to kids when they're fearing something that's really not there, but if it were, it'd be horrifying. How scary that would be.
It would be child abuse to tell your child that, we're going to put you down at 8 p.m. And if you get up before 7 a.m., there's a monster under the bed and he will grab you and pull you under there. But that would be called child abuse. But for some reason, it's acceptable to teach children about demons.
Wow. Yeah, it's bizarre. So, tell me about something or someone that influenced your faith the most.
Um, I almost want to talk about, I guess that could be for good or bad, or
Sure.
I'll mention my grandma Petrovich. She was my dad's grandmother on his mother's side, and she was just the most wonderful woman you could ever know. She went to mass every single day, and she was very kind. What I remember about her was that even well into old age, she was still driving. And one time she came over to our house to visit, but none of us were there. The family was out. Well, we came back and saw Grandma's car parked in front of the house, and was just finishing up sweeping out off the whole patio and kind of cleaning up the backyard. That's just the kind of person she was. I remember
Wow.
one time I mentioned in passing about needing a watch, or my watch was broken. Well, the next time I saw her, she gave me a watch. And she cared about people, and she was just the kind of person who, when I think about a person who lives their faith compassionately and, you know, in a real way, in a real good way, I would imagine her.
Hmm. That's cool. So she made a big impression on you, it sounds like.
She did, and when I get irritated at some of the, say, harmful religious sentiments flying around even today, I sometimes, I catch myself from wanting to lash out because I know that there are other Grandma Petroviches out there, and they, deserve, respect, and they are really living their faith.
They're good
because they love
people.
people. Exactly.
Yeah, they're good people. Regardless of their belief system, they're good people.
Exactly.
And yeah, I think you're right. At the end of the day, that's what it's about, How do you
Yeah.
treat other people, What kind of a person are you,
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that faith necessarily makes you good. I sometimes think religion is like alcohol. It makes you more of who you already are. And I know that there are people who are on the other side that I could describe who use their faith, and they use their faith to, buttress their prejudices, their desire for power, their ignorance, and so on.
Yeah.
Sometimes think religion is simply kind of a means to express who you are deep down inside anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. So her Grandma Petrovich, so did she, just having her influence in your life, was that something that you felt kind of encouraged you to be a good person yourself?
Um,
Just her example? Or was it just, years later looking back on it, you really realized kind of the positive impact she'd had?
yeah, I'd say it was the latter. You
Yeah.
know, she served as an example of how I want to be when I'm much older. You
Mm-hmm.
know, put yourself out there, and maybe it doesn't really have a lot to do with religion, but the only reason I brought her up was because she was very religious. And sometimes it's hard when you're talking about a person, what's the religion and what's not. It it
Yeah, blends together maybe, or it's all kind of the same package. It's mixed in.
Exactly. So now I've kind of realized I tend to parse a person's religion apart from who they are. A lot of people would say, no, my religion is who I am, and blah blah blah. Well, and I think that is on them if they want to be that way, and not that it's necessarily even a bad thing. Um, but we have to be able to talk about ways that religion is harmful without
Right.
people taking personal offense as if we're attacking them.
Yeah.
If they so closely self-identify with their faith that they cannot accept a legitimate criticism, I think that says more about them
Mm-hmm.
than about the person trying to be honest.
Yeah, it reminds me of, if you were to attack someone's political views, in a constructive way, if you were to discuss them with that person.
Yeah,
I I think any open-minded person would be willing to hear a critique of their point of view from someone else from a different point of view. But if the second you say something that questions them, they turn into, completely upset or get furious or something, then, like you said, it says more about them, who they are, and that the fact that they're pretty much closed-minded and maybe they
yeah,
haven't thought through all of, the things they believe.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It becomes more of a group think. When people start to get like that, I tend to think of tribalism, and I tend to think of the defense goes up, the walls go up, and sometimes even the cannons come out. There's something at work there that has more to do with, I think, tribalism,
Hmm.
perhaps.
Yeah.
But that's probably a whole nother, discussion. It could, go on, I guess.
Yeah. So, in what ways do you think that Grandma Petrovich, influenced your faith? Then.
Um, I think she showed me that, having grown up Catholic, I mean, I did a lot of external things, you do this, you do that, you don't eat, 1 hour before communion and blah, blah, blah. She reminded me that you have to be kind, you have to live your faith. If you say that you are motivated by a loving God, you really have to show it. Put yourself out there. Don't just say, pat yourself on the back, say, oh, good, I went to church today, now all is well. You have to actually do something. Like if you stop, you're waiting for somebody to pick up a broom and sweep, for example, as she did. Or you hear somebody needs something, then get it, buy it for them, provide for them. She taught me that faith needs works.
Hmm. That's cool. So it's for her. It was much more than just following the rules, and she kind of showed you the how to live it out, kind of thing.
Yeah, and she did. I mean, she didn't even know that she was doing it, but that's the impression I got. She was being who she was, and unbeknownst to her, she inspired me and made me think.
Yeah, that's cool. It kind of makes you just the way she lived her life or lived out her faith. Uh, had a positive impact on you and made you want to also be a kind person and be there for people. And it sounds like.
Yeah, and even today, if I stop and really think about it, and I still kind of, as outspoken as I want to be sometimes about the harmful aspects of religion.
Hmm.
I, remembering her kind of reminds me, look, there's gentle people out there who,
Yeah.
choose your words carefully.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a good point.
yeah,
Yeah, there's good people who aren't religious at all. There's good people that are religious.
yeah.
So, during this time in your life, growing up, what did God mean to you personally?
I guess God was a distant, kind of angry, aloof uh, father figure, and it was kind of confusing too, because as Christians were taught, there's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. In my mind, there was, God the Father was kind of aloof. Jesus was our way to the Father, but Mary was our way to Jesus. And so there was this weird triad of um, figures you kind of had to negotiate through.
Yeah,
And
especially for Catholics, because you have Mary thrown in there too. It's not just the Trinity.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in fact, you know, Jesus was often, I thought of Jesus as being kind of angry and so on, because I was taught that. I was taught that, we were taught a lot of things having to do with visions and things like that, where supposedly people had a vision and then it got put into a book. We would read these books and things like that. And one of the visions was somebody had a vision and Mary was talking to the person and saying, my son Jesus is angry at the earth. His wrath is about to spill out. The only reason his arm is raised to strike the earth, but the only reason he has not struck the earth yet is because I'm behind him holding his arm back. But even I cannot hold on to his arm any longer. So when you ask me, what was God to me, that was the God I was raised with. A
Wow.
very angry thing with his arm raised, with the Mother Mary holding his arm back, trying to keep him from striking.
That's a terrifying image to have, especially growing up.
Exactly. I was a kid when I heard that. And there's no good reason to tell a child that.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So there was a lot of strange things like that too. A lot of focus on the end times and with, because Catholics use the Bible as one aspect of revelation or of God's revealed truth. There's some kind of artistic license. And so there's strange stories, strange accounts, strange predictions that you hear as a kid growing up. And I often think that there's sort of a kind of there's an evangelical type of fear, and then there's a Catholic kind of a fear. I've listened to a lot of evangelicals talk about their upbringing and the things they try to wrestle through. And as you know, there's some overlap with Catholicism, but definitely Catholicism also has its own flavor.
Yeah. I've always kind of thought of Catholicism as something that's a little bit more it's more formal, like in the, the liturgy and stuff like that. But I also kind of, as an evangelical growing up, my impression of Catholics was that they were it was a nominal thing. They just kind of went to mass like every once in a while. But it sounds like for some, and this would include you, it was almost a fundamentalist belief system, like within Catholicism, like a very strict, very
Oh, it was very much so.
yeah.
I mean, when you're on your knees in the living room, praying, definitely. I remember one time, well, they have these things called novenas. Novenas are, it's a series of like prayers you can say. And for example, there's this, what was it called? I think it was called the 5 First Saturdays, where for 5 straight months on the first Saturday, you go to Mass, and then after Mass, you say this prayer. And after the end of that, that's called a novena, I believe. And maybe I'm getting that wrong. But after that series of 5 Masses on the 5 first Saturdays and praying those prayers, your 5 senses will always be protected. And so my mom and I did that. That's what I mean. I mean, we were definitely all in, that we weren't just going to church, like I say, for the donuts afterwards. We believed absolutely everything.
Wow.
To the very letter, it was all very literal and real.
Wow. That's that's intense stuff,
Yeah.
Coming down to like praying for your senses, like to be, I guess, optimized or to be at their best or something, and praying every night, on your knees, and it just, it's an intense kind of faith.
Yeah, and there's even things that you wear, something called a scapular. I don't know if you know what a scapular is. Well, basically, imagine a small piece of square cloth, about maybe, a little bit larger than a postage stamp, maybe not larger than a sticky note. So somewhere between a postage stamp and a sticky note. And then 2 straps going up from it over your shoulders, and the 2 straps meet another patch of cloth. So it's sort of like 2 pieces of cloth that you drape over your shoulders. And there are different colors of scapulars, and different scapulars are said to have certain powers, certain meanings, certain advantages. And the brown scapular was considered the most powerful. And if you die with the brown scapular on, you are, I think, you're guaranteed to be in a state of grace when you die, or you'll have a priest at your death, as long as you're. And there's also, I think, the blue scapular, there's the red scapular, there's the black scapular. And we were taught, this is what you do. And the scapular even had some kind of some roughness to it on the back of it. So when you wore it, you could choose to wear it against your skin. So it was always kind of a mild irritant to kind of remind you, you're wearing this scapular, and to keep your mind on holy things.
Wow. That's intense. I mean, it's the word that comes to mind is superstitious,
Oh, it was very superstitious. I remember one time we had a little tiny bottle of holy water, water that is simply blessed by a priest. Well, I was accidentally dropped it, and so I followed the proper procedure to get rid of it. And you can't just scoop it up and throw it in the trash. You take a cloth, you soak up the water, you pick up the glass, you either have to burn the cloth or bury it. And I think I chose to bury it.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy.
Oh yeah.
There's like all these rules for every little thing in life that happens.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So what else during, this time of your life was significant, or what else would you like people to know kind of about this time in your life? Before, we're going to jump into questions and doubts and kind of when you started to doubt things. But before we do that, what else was significant about this time for you?
I kind of put the time into 2 major portions. There's the childhood portion, and then there's the adult portion. So I think for the child portion, I enjoyed being an altar boy. We played Jesus of Nazareth out in the front yard. Do you remember the series Jesus of Nazareth with, I think, was his name Robert Powell, who played Jesus?
I don't remember. I don't remember that one specifically. I may have seen it, but I don't recall it. Yeah.
Anyway, we got all inspired by that. It would normally network TV would show it like the week before Easter, and it was a series of I think five-part series, from his birth to resurrection and so on. Well, we got inspired, of course, to play crucifixion. As kids, we made our own cross. We had chicken wire made into a crown of thorns. We used vampire blood. So it's in the front yard being crucified.
Wow. Chicken. This is the games that devout Catholic children play.
Well, basically. And,
let's get some chicken wire. That's crazy. Chicken that would hurt on your head.
It was rusted chicken wire, so it looked like thorns.
Even better, right?
we would make it as best we could into a circle, and then use the vampire blood, and then had this basically take two boards and pound them together like a cross, and then pound two nails in where the hands go, and then just kind of wrap your fingers around that, and then kind of hoist it up and stand there in the front yard with your fingers wrapped around the nails so it looked like you were being crucified.
Oh my goodness. And this is just, as a kid, like you and your friends, that was like...
Oh yeah, that was normal. And before that, we'd do the scourging at the pillar and stuff like that with a rope from a bathrobe and stuff like that. And of course, we still played baseball, we played football, we played army, crucifixion in there somewhere along with, other things.
With all the other normal stuff that kids do when they're growing up.
Yeah, just normal kids with, crucifixion added in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with that kind of,
little
bit of that crazy kind of, I don't know, religious stuff or whatever, but...
Yeah, that was kind of, I'm just kind of at the 50,000 foot level here. And then I met my wife to be in high school, but I knew I couldn't marry her unless she was Catholic. And so during our senior year, we had her go through Catholic classes and so on. After we graduated high school, I left the Catholic Church and went to her church, which was an evangelical church. And I know it seems strange segueing from, getting her to be Catholic and then joining the evangelical church. But then the evangelical church was the next chapter. I had so much fear, guilt, and shame as a Catholic. And just about everything, the way I said, everything's a sin. And if you enjoyed it, it was a mortal sin, And there was a lot of emphasis on, hell and purgatory and blood and thorns and tears and things like that, statues crying. It just finally, in my mind, I knew something had to give. I thought either I'm this horrible person and I'm going to spend, centuries in purgatory if I don't go to hell, or the church is pretty messed up. One or the other has to be true. I can't, do this anymore. I have to make a decision. Yeah. And I thought, I just can't take it. I'm just going to go ahead and assume here that there's problems with the church. And I told my wife to be about it. And she says, well, then why don't you come to my church? So we stopped going to the Catholic church and went back to her church. And so the whole reason I went back to, join the evangelical side was because I just simply broke, and I had to protect my sanity.
It was just too much. It sounds like too many rules, too many things to constantly be worried about.
Yeah. Well, it was more than that. It was deep internal fear. It was almost internal torture. It was just too much. It's not healthy to have, guilt, fear, and shame and so on in your mind constantly, and to think that you're constantly, basically to live in the shadow of a Jesus who has his arm raised with Mary standing behind him, holding his arm back. You just can't live like that. So I left.
Yeah. I mean, that's really good that even as, devout as you were and as, Catholic as you were, to be able to recognize this is too much. I have to at least take a couple steps back from how I keep saying intense, but how intense that would be. And like, you can't keep that up forever.
No, you can't. Something was going to go, either my sanity or, something else. So I had to make that decision. I remember thinking as I was doing this, I thought I might go to hell for doing this, but I'm going to join go to Becky's church now.
Yeah. But she was, having her in your life was kind of the time when you were realizing this is too much for me. I can't keep this kind of intensity up. I need to kind of try something different. Still
Exactly.
Christian, but I need to, all the while fearing, if I'm walking away from Catholicism, am I going to go to hell? Am I going to go to purgatory?
Oh yeah.
All those fears are still in your head at that time.
Yeah, and in the official Catholic teaching, official teaching is if you miss Mass, that's a mortal sin. There's sin and then there's mortal sin. Mortal sin means if you commit the sin and don't confess it to a priest before you die, you go straight to hell. And
Wow.
so missing Mass is a mortal sin unless you have a darn good reason for missing Mass. And so my decision not to go to the Catholic Church and to go to the Assemblies of God Church was, according to my faith, a mortal sin. And that's why I thought in my mind, I might go to hell for this, but I can't take it. I just have to roll the dice here and think that that the church is messed up, and I'm just going to join her church instead.
So Mass is just church service on Sundays?
Yeah.
So if you miss one, you go straight to hell if you don't confess why you didn't go?
Officially.
Wow.
There are a lot of mortal sins. There's venial sins. Venial sin is, you ate a cookie when you weren't supposed to. Mortal sin is, willfully doing some gravely wrong thing. And some of the things are, missing Mass, certain things, having to do with other things having to do with, well, obviously murder, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to. Oh, and if you've done any of these things and you have not confessed it to a priest, you're not in a state of grace. That means if you receive Holy Communion with mortal sin on your soul, that's an even worse sin.
Wow.
So you can see how the sins could pile up, and how if you were too embarrassed to confess something to a priest, you would then go to Mass and heap another sin upon the sin you committed earlier. And that's what I mean. It just became so great. It was like a debt. It was like a financial debt, actually.
Wow.
I just felt maybe the way some people would feel completely burdened by debt that they owe that keeps compounding. That's exactly how I felt.
Wow.
And in Catholicism, even if at the very end, you have a priest and so on, you still have to burn it off in purgatory. It's not enough just to be forgiven. You have to make up for it either on this earth or in purgatory. And so what scared me so much was this huge, huge debt of penance that I had built up. I felt like I was going to, spend, centuries in purgatory.
Wow. And you and every other Catholic who believes that is thinking every day of your life, every day you live, you're essentially going to be adding on to that debt that you owe Christ.
Definitely. And in fact, we'd heard, another vision, another story about Carmelite nuns who spent 600 years in purgatory. The reason being not so much what they did, but what they didn't do. And so I thought, okay, here's me, a teenage boy, I'm going to be there for millennia.
The bar is so high,
It's horrible.
Yeah. Wow. So, during this time of your life, you transitioned from Catholicism into an Assemblies of God, which is very charismatic and, it's Protestant, obviously. So,
Exactly.
what was that transition like going into that? And
Well, it was Life Center Church in Tacoma, Washington, and it was upbeat. It was kind of a relief because they focused more on the forgiveness part, and they weren't so much focused on the works part. They explained, obviously they used the Bible more than the Catholic Church did.
mm-hmm.
And it was more positive, happy, joyful, so on and so forth. So it was kind of a bump for me, a positive bump upward, kind of a relief to know Jesus paid the whole thing, all that debt I thought I had, I don't have.
Wow.
It was just an absolute relief.
That's that would be that. I know, coming from kind of that background, charismatic evangelical background that I had, forgiveness was a big deal. You can't do works to save yourself. So that was my understanding. And so if you came from that Catholic background and you transitioned into this really emphasizing forgiveness and all of this, that would definitely be a huge relief. Oh my gosh, I can still go to heaven. I can still be a good person, and I don't have to go make up all of these things that I've done, make up for all these things I've done wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, I think it was Hebrews where the light came on. It said, just as through the one man, Adam, sin entered the world, so then through the one man, Jesus, we all are saved or something. And that just kind of turned the lights on in my brain. I looked at my, debt in terms of that and felt like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's how one person's death, just as one man, we all are condemned, one man makes it so we're all justified.
And
so,
and how old were you about this time? You were a teenager, right?
yeah, this was after my senior year in high school. So we had graduated. This was I graduated high school in June of '87, and so this was late summer of '87, summer of '87, and fall of '87. And
Okay.
I actually started working for my father-in-law. He had taken their home and converted it to a adult foster care home for elderly. And my father-in-law and his wife lived in a close by apartment, and my wife was living there as well. Well, I started working for him, working in this adult foster care home. That was my job. I lived there and took care of elderly people. My shift was the late afternoon and bedtime shift. He was also a minister, and he had a chaplain. He wanted to start a chaplaincy program at Western State Hospital, and so he thought it would be a good idea to have me work with him on that. That he would raise funds to have a chaplaincy program, and that I would live on the donations. And so I actually started to assist him with some of his chapel services out there, and it got to a point where I took over my own I basically went out on my own. So for 2 years, I was a volunteer chaplain at Western State Hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this was on the combative women's ward. So this was, I'd say, from about December of 1987 until late 1989. I remember I took I had some wood, I made a little cross out of it, made a little, stand with it, stained it. I had a big old boom box. I'd prepare the Bible readings that I wanted to talk about that service, and even a little sermon. I'd record music and put it on the cassette, to go with the whole theme. And I'd drive out to Western State and park the car and take the boom box and cross, and use the key card to get in. And gradually all of the women would come to the rec room. I think it was a rec room, and I'd have set up tables, and there'd be chairs and everything, and I'd have the cross there. I'd have the boom box, and I conducted a service, and I did that for 2 years. And I actually am happy I did that. I was even ordained by my father-in-law in May of 1989 at Oberlin Congregational Church. It was kind of bogus in that I didn't have the degree or anything, but the idea was, well, what makes you a true minister of Christ is God's anointing anyway, so let's get you ordained now, and then you can get your education after the fact. I kind of roll my eyes at that whole ordination thing, but I don't regret having participated for 2 years, giving what I honestly understood was the right thing to those people at Western State.
Yeah.
I'll always remember that. And it was once a week, and after a while it became twice a week, for 2 years.
What do you think it was doing for those women to, or whoever you were putting on services for? What do you think it was doing for them that made you feel so good about what you were doing?
Well, I've only really felt good. How about this? I'll answer it this way. I think I know what it did for them is that hearing the songs, it took them back. All of them are people. They all had lives. Some of them have been there for decades. But hearing the songs, hearing the prayers, and I'd go around and pray with them individually and so on. Hearing all these things, the sounds, the words, the visual of the cross, I think it took them back, and it maybe reminded them of a different time.
Give them
And
some peace, perhaps.
yeah, and while I, don't see the world, through a cross or religious music anymore, I think it was very valuable for them at that time to hear that, and I'm glad that I could provide that for them. I was honestly doing truly in my heart what I truly believed in, and even though I don't believe in all that anymore, I still feel good about having done what I honestly thought was the right thing to help
Yeah.
people. Yeah,
Yeah, and it seems like it probably gave them, like I said, some peace, and they're in a difficult spot if they're at Western State. It's a mental hospital, so if they're in a rough spot, so to have anything in their life give them solace and help them feel okay, or
yeah.
feel okay with where they're at. That probably was a big deal for a lot of them.
And I'll go off the path for a second here. All I'm gonna, I'm not a professional at mental health or anything, but they would chit chat with me a little bit, and sometimes they would tell me things about why they were there or things that happened to them. And without going into detail, I'll simply say, if any of us had to endure what they endured, we also would be in a mental hospital. Mental illness can be like having a broken leg or having a terrible, accident where you get caught in a piece of machinery and you're mangled. That can happen to a person's mind. And so I don't look down on people who are, mentally ill at all. I don't like it when people make fun of the mentally ill, because I know that so much of what they have been through would break anybody else as
Yeah.
well. We should treat them like they have, a severe arm injury or leg injury or back injury or something, and not be so cruel.
Right. Who would make fun of somebody who had, like you said, who was crippled, physically crippled? Who
Exactly.
would mock that person? Well, a horrible person would do that. So,
Yeah.
when someone's got a mental condition, and of course now, this day and age, mental health is becoming much more, it's being emphasized a lot more, and it's people are wanting, society's wanting to treat it more similar to how we've viewed physical ailments and physical injuries and stuff like you're saying, you
Yeah.
know, because it is such a big deal, and a lot of people struggle with a lot of different things.
Right.
In your mind, being a chaplain, this is right after high school, and you're working with your father-in-law. Was this, in your mind, your career path? Did you see yourself being a minister long term, or?
Exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
that was the plan. Um, like I said, I graduated in June of '87, started as a working for him and doing the chaplain thing in late '87. My wife and I were married in February of '88, and the plan was that I would, people were asking me, well, what are you going to do, Marty? You don't have an education, you don't have insurance. What's going on? I kept saying, God will provide. God will provide. Anything that you would normally say to somebody who's getting married without any preparation, people said to me, and my answer was always, God will provide, because that's what I was taught. And the plan was that he would go raise funds, and yeah, I would live as a chaplain, doing the chaplaincy program at Western State, and that went on and on, into 1989. But he was unable to get the funds raised, and there was always something going on, because he had other things going on in his life as well. I remember at that point, my wife was starting to get real about it and said, Marty, when are you going to have the funds? What's happening? You keep saying God will provide. What's going to happen? And I just kind of thought about that. And then I had a major milestone in my life. And that was in September of 1989. I stepped on a piece of glass. And that was significant to me. My wife and I took a little inflatable raft down by, through Stillicum. There's this place, says no swimming. Well, we put the raft in there.
As young people do.
Sure. My wife is in there, and I took my shoes off, and I'm walking around through the water, pushing her gently through the raft, and I stepped on something sharp, pulled my foot up, and there's a big old piece of glass in my foot.
Oh.
Thought, uh-oh. So we just kind of worked our way back to the shore. Ended up in a clinic. Basically, they, did everything, cleaned it, so on and so forth. they told me, come back again so that we can check on your progress, and then come back a third time so that we can take the stitches out. Well, I went home with my foot all bandaged up, and I realized I can't even afford to go back. I thought, I can't even afford to take my own stitches out. God is not providing. Where's God? I thought that if I did this and this and this, and I was faithful, well, God would show his blessings. And I thought, what would happen, Marty, if instead of your stupid foot, if this was Becky having a difficult pregnancy, you couldn't even, provide for her. God's not providing. You've got to do something. And when I had these thoughts, I remember I was working at that adult foster care home, and I was staring at myself in the mirror, just staring at myself. That was a major milestone, with my foot wrapped up in a thing, staring right at myself. And I realized, Marty, God's not providing. You either have a choice. You can put your head back in the sand and pretend that God will provide, or you can do the scary thing and start to rethink how you're going to provide for your family. And I just remember feeling terrified, and I thought, I've got to do the right thing for my future family. God's not providing. And so I turned in my notice for my father-in-law, and I stopped the chaplaincy program, and I went to vocational technical school in Tacoma and learned computer programming. And that was the end of that chapter.
Wow, that's a and that seemed to happen really fast.
It did happen fast.
Up to that point, beside just usual doubts that lots of Christians have, had you had moments like this before where it was a serious doubt, a serious question, or was this like kind of that moment where it just hit you like a ton of bricks and you go, oh my God, like God's not taking care of him, God's not providing, Well,
I remember, I think that was the first real honest to goodness reality hitting my faith, and something has to give moment. I remember kid, I remember wondering, well, what happens if there's no God and I'm just wasting my time being an altar boy and so on. But that was not nearly as intense because I had a future family. I took my marriage seriously. I took my, my dad taught me, he was always a really good provider. And so I knew what it was to, support your family, go to work, make sure that there's always food, insurance, and everything else. And I wasn't able to do that. And so I had to, it really was significant to me, that moment. I still remember staring at myself. The mirror was a long mirror. It was mounted on a closet, and I just remember staring right at myself.
Wow. That must have been horrible, because you'd invested yourself in this chaplaincy and you had this plan for your life to, kind of follow that path. And then in a moment you cut your foot and you think, okay, I'm just going to go get taken care of. And then the realization hits you that I don't have the money to go get it taken care of. And God hasn't provided me the money to go get it taken care of. And it's, well, maybe you can elaborate on this more, but I mean, for something to happen that quickly, that much of a significant thing happen, I would think that in a sense your whole world would come crashing down, or at least like spiritually speaking, things, it's an upheaval. It just throws everything up in the air again.
Yeah, it does. And suddenly, everything that people had told me before I was married, that meant they were right and I was wrong. Don't get married so quick, go to school first, or do this or that. Also, I had a lot of fear, about going to college and so on. And I thought, well, but God's providing for me. I don't have to worry about that. So then that become scary to me. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm just in the same boat as everybody else. This faith doesn't really put me ahead of anybody. I've got to scrap like everybody else. And that's what I was thinking when I went to I went to Bates in Tacoma. I had to be like everybody else and try to work my way through it. And it was scary. It was very scary. I knew all of that as I was sitting there staring at myself in the mirror, that I was going to have to face a lot of my fears. I could not hide anymore. I could not use my faith as a blanket. Mm-hmm. I had to grow up, man up, however you want to phrase it. And it was scary.
So when this happened to you, what kept you hanging on to your belief in God?
Well, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I felt that, well, maybe, as there's different flavors of of faith and belief and people's thoughts evolve, I began to see, my faith is something, as humankind's attempt to understand, the unknowable, for example, and that, well, maybe faith is something, it's our best attempt at trying to wrestle with the big questions. And so I began to try to comfort myself being in that place of respecting the unknown, recognizing that there's the unknown, and that that's what faith is, and that religious expression is the manifestation of that, and other religions are doing the best they can as well. So I no longer felt other people were going to hell. And that kind of kept me going for a while. But when we started having children, that was another major milestone, because it got to a point where my wife and I would start to read them Bible stories or take them to church or whatever. We had to get real about the concept of sin, that there's a God who demands blood sacrifice to forgive our wrongdoing, and that if apart from him we will burn in hell. That core fundamental truth of Christianity, we hadn't taught our kids that. And I thought to myself, I don't believe that. Why in the world would I teach that to my kids? And so not teaching that to my kids, or to our kids, my wife and I both agreed to that, was kind of another milestone. I told my wife, I say, because she and I would struggle, what do we believe? What do we not believe? Where should we go to church today? We literally took out the yellow pages sometimes on Sunday morning, and instead of looking for what kind of pizza place should we call, we were literally, let's see what kind of church. And we tried so hard to make it work. Finally, I just said, look, we know what we really believe based on what we're willing to pass on to our kids. If we're not willing to pass it on to our kids, then we don't really believe in it. And so not passing that on to our kids was a major milestone for me. And that was another crack.
Wow.
In the whole edifice.
So was your wife kind of going through some similar stuff as you were at that time, as far as because your foot had been hurt, these things were causing her to doubt as well?
Not necessarily. I think I tend to process things and internalize things differently than she. And I suppose I'd have to talk with her to really hear her point of view. What I know is that I don't know that she was as maybe tortured by all this stuff as I was. She tends to be more comfortable with taking the good parts and just ignoring the bad parts, or just kind of realize that not everybody takes everything so seriously. So just take the good and don't worry about the bad. I tend to be kind of an all or nothing person. I tend to look at all the things and I say, well, if this is wrong, well, then maybe this is also wrong. So her story would be different, I think.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because I do see certain people. I mean, I'm in your boat. It's all or nothing. And that, in my situation, was detrimental. It was horrible, because it meant I put a lot on the line, and I really took some risks that ended up being painful and difficult. But yeah, I often almost been jealous of people who are just like, well, just take the good, and it doesn't need to be this extreme, and they kind of they go through this kind of process. I think it's easier for them to kind of get through some of these questions and these difficult things.
Yeah, and that's also, it's hard for me to hear it when people say that. I feel, on the one hand, I envy, like you say, I'm kind of envious of them. Another part of me is irritated and annoyed by them, because I feel like what they're doing is they're having the best of both worlds. They're getting the benefits of quote, being Christian without having as much skin in the game. At least that's how I interpret it. I know that that's a very poor way of trying to explain everybody's experiences or intents, but that's just kind of how I see it. Mm-hmm. If you're just going to sit there and say, oh, well, we don't need to worry about that. Well, why not? Why don't you speak out about it? If you don't believe in it, do more than just shoo it away. Speak out about it, because there's somebody being burdened and oppressed by it.
Well, that's a really good point, because the Marty McDonalds of the world are taking it literally, seriously, and suffering in some ways because of these beliefs. So if you have an insight over here that could help Marty or someone else like Marty, kind of get relief from this really oppressive belief or practice, yeah, I can see why you're saying that, because, the person who's going through that is suffering through it. And if they just had a different insight or different perspective, perhaps that would relieve them of that difficulty. But other people are just kind of going along maybe and just not thinking about the implications of it.
Yeah, they're kind of being enablers because they don't want to rock the boat, and they want to keep the benefits of keeping the peace, and so they serve as enablers to those who are the oppressors. That might be a very poor metaphor, but that's just how I see it. So I stepped on the glass in 1989. My daughter was born in 1993. My son was born in 1996.
So handful of years, 4 years goes by, and
Uh-huh.
well, probably as they start to get older is when you start doing these prayers with them, and
Uh-huh.
so, you know,
Yeah, we did. We got them baptized in the Catholic Church. So we tried to go back to the Catholic Church because in our minds, my wife and I both agreed the Evangelical Church just didn't have the rich tradition and symbolism and so on of the Catholic Church. And so we decided to go back to the Catholic Church on our own terms. And we got each of our kids baptized and received communion, not believing that it was literally the actual body and blood of Jesus Christ, but a symbol, which is, of course, in Catholic theology, you're going to hell. But
it's actual body. Yeah, that's the weird.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
Exactly. And so my, part two of Catholicism as an adult then was to not be so literal and try to see things as more metaphorical. But still, I remember feeling, even as we were taking our kids to church and I was trying to see things as metaphor, I kept crossing my fingers behind my back. Every time there were a lot of prayers and a lot of things said during the Mass where I thought, well, I don't believe that. And I just kept crossing my fingers behind my back or holding my nose, and I told Becky, I said, it's getting more and more. I cross my fingers and hold my nose through most of it rather than only some of it.
That's when you started to realize that your beliefs weren't lining up with the church in a significant way.
Exactly. It just became more, more of a misfit rather than something that could fit.
That's a really interesting insight about when you realize that, hey, I don't really believe some of these things I'm praying about with my kids, and if I'm not willing to pass down just the insight that if I'm not willing to pass down some of this theology or these beliefs, then maybe maybe I don't believe it anymore.
Exactly.
And then you start questioning, so what should we be passing down to our kids?
Exactly. And so what we did was we decided, let's just stop going to church. I mean, and it wasn't a big shaking moment or anything. We just, being young parents, there were many times we wouldn't go to church anyway, simply because somebody's sick or we're just too tired because we had a late night last night, whatever.
Yeah.
And so those times just became more and more. And we just simply stopped going to church. It was exhausting. We tried the Catholic Church, and when that didn't work again, we tried the Episcopal Church. We tried the Lutheran Church. We tried.
Wow.
And so if there's one thing I want anybody to understand, I left Christianity, but I tried and I tried and I tried and I tried to make it work. I gave it my best shot from every angle. I tried the conservative Catholicism, I call it medieval Catholicism side. I tried the evangelical side. I tried, different Lutheran churches. There's the church, there's one in downtown Olympia, a very liberal church. We tried everything. We tried it all different kinds of interpretations. And I tried so hard. And I know a lot of other people feel that same way. They try so hard, and when they leave, they're dismissed as, oh, you just weren't a true Christian.
Yeah.
Or, oh, you just wanted to sin. Or, oh, you just need to pray for more faith. No. We tried so hard.
Yeah, it's not something you asked for. You didn't want to walk away from Christianity.
Exactly.
At least initially. Yeah, when it starts.
Yeah, we tried so hard to make it work. Even when it was hard, we still tried making it work. But it just, no matter what church we tried, no matter what kind of mindset I tried to take into it, there was just this big giant elephant in the room that there's this deity who demands blood sacrifice to forgive wrongdoing. And if you don't believe it, or if you're not in his good grace, you will burn in hell. So you can take it how, go to any church and try to, cherry pick certain parts of the Bible or whatever. But the big giant elephant in the room is that deity that demands blood sacrifice, or otherwise you're going to hell.
Yeah.
And to me, no matter what I did, I just couldn't shake that. And I thought, and that was pretty key. I thought, if I cannot embrace the blood sacrifice, then what's the point?
That's a fundamental part of the faith.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
linchpin. People say Jesus is the linchpin of Christianity. I say not really. It's this belief that there's a deity who demands blood sacrifice. If you pull that out, that's what causes everything to crashing down. Jesus is simply the reason, or he's the means where we get out of this pickle, the sacrifice and give your heart to him and so on. None of that would even be necessary without the deity that demands the spillage of blood.
Without the demand for atonement.
Exactly. And so if you don't believe in the blood sacrifice, you really can't, if you're me anyway, you just can't play make-believe anymore.
Yeah. So at what point then did you realize that you were agnostic?
Well, I think it would have been when we were, I'd say maybe in the mid 90s. I remember I was reading a book. There were
your kids were still young then. It was that same time you were kind of going through trying all these churches and eventually we're like, okay, I can't go back to church anymore. I can't buy into this. And so it was around that same time that you realized you were agnostic then.
Right. There was a book I think I read roughly maybe in 1996. I remember it was shortly after my son was born. It was called When Jesus Became God, The Struggle to Define Christianity During the Last Days of Rome by Richard Rubinstein. And he explained how in the world a guy in that part of the world 2,000 years ago became a deity. And he explained how it was because of Roman culture. And basically the Council of
Nicaea?
Yes, I think it was Nicaea. I think Constantine, he was in charge of, kind of oversaw that one, the Nicene, or the Council of Nicaea. And that was to determine, is Jesus divine or not? And well, guess what? There's all this talk and controversy. The emperor himself helped break the tie. Somebody who, according to Roman, culture, believed emperors themselves were divine. In fact, I think he probably declared other people divine. And so that's where, when I read that, when I understood the impact of the Council of Nicaea, led by a Roman emperor, on the belief in Jesus' divinity, it was kind of like seeing, like the scene in The Wizard of Oz, where you look behind the curtain. You see the man behind the curtain, and you realize, oh my gosh, I don't think I was supposed to see this, but I cannot unsee what I just saw.
Yeah.
Reading about the politics and the time in which he was declared God and the people that declared him God, I can't unsee that. So that was major to me. And at that point, I remember at that point I felt Jesus is not God. And I guess you could say at that point I was officially agnostic.
Wow. So was that book, did you say there was another book that was influential?
Yeah, basically...
You're probably doing a lot of reading at that time on this subject. Yeah.
This was before the internet was a thing, so I had to go to the library and do all my checking books out and actually read books. Anyway, it was in the summer of 1991 or 1992, Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism by Shelby Spong. Reading the book Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism was kind of an eye-opener, and it was the first time I'd really read a book critical of what I was brought up to believe. It was written by a pastor or a minister, somebody on the inside, and it almost felt like a guilty pleasure reading something I wasn't supposed to be reading. Yet it was somebody who was very educated in Christian theology, and he has videos and things on YouTube. You should look up Shelby Spong, read some of his books, or hear some of his videos. I still respect him very, very much.
You know, what's funny behind me is a book by him, Liberating the Gospels. And that was one I read right after I got out of Bible school. And I had already decided I didn't believe in God at that point. But it was one that kind of helped me confirm my feelings about everything, really. So yeah, he's pretty influential. I've heard other atheists and agnostics mention that he, you know, reading his books made an impact on them.
Yeah, and there's almost kind of a what if, a kind of a what could have been feeling when I think of people like Spong. If there was a church here in Olympia with somebody like him, you know, would I still try to live within the Christian framework using metaphor, having him as kind of a pastor? So I sometimes wonder what it would have been like. I don't think I would have, you know, it wouldn't have changed the fact that I'm atheist, but I can understand why some people choose to stay in the Christian faith, having it as a framework to explore deep questions, you know, because of people like Spong.
Yeah, I've heard other people frame it that way, that it gives you a place to wrestle with, like you were saying earlier, wrestle with the big questions of life. It's just the framework. It's that it doesn't necessarily matter, the framework itself. It just gives you somewhere to kind of have those debates or those thoughts, or to think through some of these things.
Yeah, and that's one part about religion that I do appreciate, that I do respect. I mean, people that really stop, and I may disagree with their choice of framework, but I can at least appreciate their thoughtfulness and their honesty, you know, the richness of the framework, the symbols, things like that. I understand those are all important to us as human beings. You know, it would have been good to have more of that, I suppose, growing up, but you know, sometimes it's a matter of too little, too late, and I think that the horse had already left the barn.
Yeah, but at that point, yeah. So you had your wife was fully aware of kind of all these doubts and questions you were having. Was there anyone else that knew of these kind of thoughts that you were going through?
No, not really. I would share some things with one of my brothers, but you know, not really. I kind of was. I think my family kind of suspected. You know, my parents suspected. They saw we weren't going to church, and I remember one time they had a conversation with us saying, you know, if you don't teach your children these things now, it'll be too late, you know, later. And I thought, well, yeah, I'm not teaching them, and I hope they don't, you know, fall prey to it, you know, later if they want to. That's, you know, here's another thing my wife and I talked about. We said, you know, what's better, to teach them these things, and then later if they don't want it, they can drop it, or don't teach it, and if they want it later, they can get it. And I said, you know what? Once you have it, it's really, really, really hard to get rid of it. It's much easier to just grab it later if you want it. But once you have it and you don't want it, it stays with you. It's kind of like if you look at a brick that's been spray painted, you can wash off the spray paint, but the porous brick makes it so that there's still remnants of the paint still in there. You're never going to get rid of it all.
Wow.
And so I thought it was a safer thing for our children's well-being and their mental well-being, not to expose them to these things that we weren't convinced of. They would be responsible, knowing that if in fact it was real, and if they really needed it, they could easily, as a, you know, person later on in life, do that.
What was the most difficult thing during this time for you?
Oh, you mean with the children and
just going through these doubts and realizing that you weren't Christian anymore? Was there one thing that stands out to you that was the most difficult about that whole process?
Oh yeah, I felt that there was. I needed to somehow figure out, how do I see my family of origin, primarily my parents. I did not want to just think of them as weirdos. I thought, because here on the one hand, I have to reject these beliefs because I think they're just, you know, crazy and harmful. Yet if I do that, I feel like my parents are connected to that. I wanted to reconcile. I wanted to somehow re-engage them as an adult and talk about these things, so that I could continue to have a relationship with them, um, on, without treating them badly.
Disrespectfully or condescendingly, yeah, that kind of thing.
And so I tried to, over the years, have these conversations, but it didn't really work out. I've I won't get into all of that. But it's a very painful, aspect of my life now. Basically, they've doubled down, and so I just have to move forward.
That's tough when it impacts relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you think was the most helpful, maybe during this time, during the same time? What was the thing that helped you through?
Hmm. I would say, well, I would say reading. I'm the type of person that likes to, process things and think about them and I'm deliberative, and I want to make the right decision because I want to, I just want to do the right thing. And so the most helpful thing for me was to read, because when you're reading, you're kind of exercising, your intellect,
Yeah.
and so I guess specifically Spong helped me a lot. I suppose that was quite helpful. Um, and then as time went on, even the internet, seeing other people out there, other people sharing their stories, other people, for instance, ex-Christian forums and things like that, seeing other people and their experiences, letting me realize I'm not crazy, and I don't just quote need more faith. Um, that so when hearing other information, whether it's an author or other people sharing, um, especially the emotional aspect.
Yeah.
For me, it was deeply emotional, in all that, and so it might be easy to write people like me off as, oh, I just have thin skin. But no, when you see so many other people saying the same thing, you realize you're not alone. And so the short answer to your question is, what's been most helpful would be when other people share their thoughts.
That's awesome. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the entire point. I feel the same way. When people talk about it, it makes me feel so much better. And, for me, it's been 10 years that I've been atheist. And even hearing someone's story that has so many familiar things about it to someone else's, or maybe I've heard something similar, it still inspires me every time, and it's encouraging, and it makes you feel like, hey, I'm not the only one here. I'm not nuts. I didn't go, I'm not crazy or something.
Yeah.
It really is encouraging.
Yeah, and that touches on something too. I want to say the thing that motivates me now I feel like I've crawled out of a hole, that I've crawled out of a pit, or however you want to phrase it, and I could just run off now and just enjoy life. But I always kind of gravitate back towards the hole, because I know there's people still in it, and I don't want to forget where I, came from, and I know that other people need help. And I feel like I'm strong now, I'm healthy now, I feel recovered now, yet I still remain close to the hole because I'm trying to help other people out. If I suppose, if I had to explain the two things, why am I outspoken about being an atheist and what motivates me, the number one thing is, anybody who feels religious guilt, fear, or shame, they don't have to feel that way anymore. I was there, I felt like it. Don't worry, there's nothing to be afraid of. And I want to encourage them and help them, let them know they're not alone. And then the second thing is basically someone's religion over there impacting somebody else over here. Basically maybe a church and state type, issue. But
Yeah.
That first point, though, the point that really keeps me going is I really want to help people who are trapped, and I want them to know they don't have to be afraid. In fact, my Facebook profile says I'm part Mr. Rogers, part Christopher Hitchens. Yeah.
That's that's a nice combo, two very different
Yeah. So
temperaments.
I feel like I want to speak out like Christopher Hitchens sometimes, yet I want people to know that they're good enough just the way they are.
That's cool.
Imagine if people really believe you are good just as you are, period. And if people could get that in their head, I wouldn't worry about all the people spouting fear and hellfire. They could speak to their blue in the face if their congregants believe they're good people already. Well, you render the fear mongers powerless.
It's so amazing to me because as a Christian, we're taught that Christianity is what makes you good. Like when you're a Christian, that's how you become good. But what you're saying and what I believe is when you leave Christianity, then you realize, I guess, how truly good you are, or that you can become actually a more of a moral person, a better person when you leave Christianity. You know, that it's the opposite of the narrative that Christianity teaches us, that we need Christianity and God to be good people, when in fact what you're saying is actually that's not true. You know,
Exactly.
we don't need that framework. We are good just the way we are.
Exactly. And I remember thinking to myself when I became, realized, oh my gosh, I'm atheist. I remember thinking, that and at different points in my life, that things are supposed to fall apart now because if I don't, do the God thing and give my heart to Jesus and live according to God's, word and so on, bad things will start to happen and I'll become immoral and be a seeker of pleasure and all that. But then none of that happened. In fact, I say that I have a keener sense of morality because whereas before I'd just say, well, I can't do that because the Bible says so. Now I say, I really stop and I think about it and I realize there's a real person there. We don't want to do X because, it would have hurt these people. Something as simple as that, becomes stronger in you. I feel like, questions of morality and things are even more focused. I feel like I haven't become, immoral and my life hasn't spun out of control. The kids still love us. My wife and I still love each other. It's this, I think it's a lie that if you leave the faith, Satan will get you, and people have their answers for that. They say, yeah, well, if you've left the faith, Satan has no reason to get you. He's just going to leave you alone, thinking, you know what, that's just a big lie.
There's an excuse for everything we say. I
Exactly.
mean, there's a response. Christianity's been around for thousands of years. They have a response for everything.
Oh,
You know
I
what I
know.
mean?
Exactly.
A scripted, yeah. I mean, it's ingrained in the way they think. And
If something bad's happening, well, that's because Satan's, you've been away from God. If something bad happens, it's because God loves you and he's chastising you. People just make up whatever they want to fit whatever situation they want. And that's how it continues throughout the centuries, is because it has this adaptive quality that has an answer for everything.
yeah. Well, I think that's really cool, Marty, that you want to be so outspoken because there's people out there who don't know that there's a lot of people out there like you and me. Or they think they're all alone. And so if we don't speak up, if we don't say something, they'll never hear. And they'll feel even more isolated. And that's never good. So
Right.
by speaking out, the great thing obviously about that is someone will hear your story. Someone will, hear you talking and go, oh, like here's a guy who's gone through this and I don't have anything to fear here. He's a good person and it worked out for him and his life's okay.
Uh-huh.
It helps them through,
Yeah. And what I will say is one of the last things to go, I guess, you can say I kind of healed, I've recovered. One of the last things to go was fear of hell. Even as I speak with people now, other people who've left the faith, we're talking adults in their 50s and 60s and even 70s. They say, even they've been an atheist for a long time, but there's that fear of hell. I suppose if I had anything to say to anybody, trying to consider what would happen if they, question their faith, is you're going to be afraid of hell, but don't take that as a sign that it's real. There's something about fear. There's something about what we're taught. If it's intermingled with fear, it takes a special hold on the brain. And so it almost helps to look at that fear as if you're looking at yourself being afraid of it and just realize it could be anything, whether it's hell or fear of a political leader or fear of anything else. anything intermingled with fear is going to have an exaggerated negative impact on your mind. So if anybody's afraid of hell, try to put that thought into its place. The fear isn't because it's real. The fear is because you've been manipulated by fear. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all. It's easier said than done, but it might take a long time for a person's emotions to catch up with their intellect. But that's okay. That happened to me as well.
Yeah. It's a little bit of PTSD in a sense. It's kind of
Absolutely.
the leftovers from just being in having it beaten to your head all your life to be
Yeah.
afraid of this thing. And fear's a big motivator.
Right. There's another good book, um, "Leaving the Fold" by Marlene Weinell. She
Huh.
she talks about this kind of thing. She says that post what she call it? Basically, she understands it as a PTSD. And she says that she's a mental health professional, and she says this is a very misunderstood, underappreciated aspect of mental health is the impact of religion. And so she is, I almost think she's a pioneer on this. I feel like she's kind of leading the charge that says, look, this religion stuff, if it's, fearful and so on, it is like PTSD. It's very real and it needs to be dealt with. And so she wrote that good book, and she continues to help people today.
That's great. I mean, I think I've heard her interviewed once or twice. She is onto something that's really important to talk
Mhm.
about. Yeah. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding people have about your deconversion?
Well, I haven't had people, well, let's see. I haven't had the chance to really talk to somebody and ask them point blank, nor have I had somebody tell me just point blank, you know, what they think of me. I kind of have to just assume that they're thinking that I'm deluded, that that the reason I deconverted was because I'm angry. They may think that my fearful Catholic upbringing, the fact that I was Catholic, that's enough. I wasn't a true Christian, so I'm not sure. I just think there's a myriad of reasons why people would be dismissive.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to really answer that because everybody has, like you say, an answer for everything. The Catholics would think that it was when I went evangelical. The evangelical would think it's when because you were Catholic.
It's almost counterproductive to even start thinking about all the things that people might be thinking. Um, I was just curious if people had expressed to you their feelings about what you went through and their view of it, but it sounds like not really, not that much.
Yeah, not very in depth at all. I mean, I was told, I need to pray for more faith.
Well, did you, Marty? Did you pray for more faith?
If people only knew the irony, if they knew the irony of that, they told me take it, pray for more faith, take it to the cross, lay your head in Jesus' lap and tell him about it. Do they even know the irony? It's an invalidation, I think, when people are just, I don't know if it's an incapability on their part or an unwillingness on their part to see me where I am.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. That's kind of what I'm getting at with that question too. Is I think that people they can't they can't see it for what it is because it invalidates their beliefs. So they have to kind
Exactly.
of make up a reason, you know,
Yeah,
to try to justify. Okay, that's why he left. Okay, that's safe. If he left for that reason, then I'm safe.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Through this whole process, what about you stayed the same after deconverting from Christianity?
Um, I'd say my care for people. If I see somebody see something that bothers me, like somebody who doesn't have, like they're dressed poorly, their shoes don't look like they're holding up very well. I'll worry about it. I'll think about it. I'll want to do something about it. Um, so even, without God, I still care about what other people are going through, I think. It's just a compassion.
That's a great answer. I love that. Like the compassion and caring for people, that stayed the same. Because I think one of the narratives, like you kind of alluded to, is that you become a bad person or you left because of a sin, but What's cool, what I think people need to hear is when you go through this process, there's parts of you that have always been there, that always will be there, and they're the good things, you know.
Yeah, and maybe I'd simply add to that where if people sense an angry tone in my voice or I sound like I'm being kind of a jerk, definitely I know I can be sometimes, but often it's because I feel somebody's being hurt. I feel like as polite as I try to be and respectful of people's beliefs as I want to be, there's certain lines that are crossed, and I think it's okay to get in someone's face or to just, break social norms and speak out about something if
Yeah.
someone's being hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the right reason to stand up and say something is if someone's being hurt by it, you know.
Yeah.
So I'll just get your I'll just ask you a few kind of shorter questions just to get your reflections and thoughts on some things.
Sure.
When you think back on the Christian you, what do you think about that person now?
Well, I thought it was a very fearful person, legalistic person, intense, I guess.
What do you like best about being an atheist?
The knowledge, the excitement of the world as it really is, an intellectual curiosity, I think, rather than have my mind and my thoughts bump up against some kind of artificial barrier, like living in some kind of dome. I feel like now there's so many more questions, and now I'm excited to have those questions. I remember thinking after I became atheist, instead of having all the Christian answers, I was having to tell myself, I don't know. And that's okay. And I love the questions. I've learned to love the questions. I replace certainty with learning to love the questions.
That's great. Name one thing that you learned or experienced that you may not have if you were still a Christian.
Seeing how this is the only life we have, we need to take better care of each other. We can't just pray anymore and hope something's okay. What I've learned is a greater responsibility, a greater sense of duty and obligation to other people and to the planet.
Because it's our one chance we have.
It's our one chance. There is not going to be somebody coming back to create a new heaven and a new earth. And any relationships that we have, we need to fix them now. Reconciliation isn't between you and God. It's between you and the person that you hurt, one to another. If somebody's lonely, we have to visit them. And if somebody needs something, we have to give it to them. We can't just have this fallback that, well, it's in God's hands, because there's no God holding anything. So the big thing I've learned is the responsibility that we as humans have to each other.
What's kind of cool is that's almost full circle. You were talking about Grandma Petrovich, and that was the lesson that she had kind of taught you by example, and she was real Catholic. You're not anymore, but that lesson's the same.
Oh, yeah.
That's neat.
It is.
Well, when you think back on your whole experience, what are you most proud of?
The fact that I never really lost myself. There was always that spark, something about me. I I know that there's people that I think maybe get defeated and maybe broken by the whole thing and can never get out or refuse to get out. I think what I'm most happy with and proud of is that I kind of fought. I kind of had a certain place in my mind where enough was just too much, and I would always kind of fight back. There were different parts in my path where I felt like I needed to really get real with who I was, and I either had to fall in line with everybody else or do what I honestly felt was right, and I opted for the latter. Chose to be an individual and do what I honestly, truly, in my heart, felt was right, knowing that I'm the one that had to stare at myself in the mirror, and I wasn't going to be able to, just kind of hide with everybody else and just, So I feel proud of the fact that I can look at myself in the mirror even now.
Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want people to know about, or anything that you want to talk about in relation to, I guess, anything that we've discussed or that we haven't discussed?
what I will say is I think this podcast is one of my milestones. Being here, being able to tell my story with you, Steve. I have my milestones literally written down on paper. I've written down this podcast as a milestone on my journey because I feel that it's a way that I can explain to people how I really feel, explain my story, tell people they don't have to be afraid. And so, for what it's worth, you are doing the right thing and you're helping me do the right thing. And I hope other people are inspired by what you're doing and what I'm doing. That's what I want to say is that
Yeah.
this podcast, what we're doing right now, for me anyway, it's very significant. It's a major milestone for me.
Well, that's awesome. That's like it's powerful to tell your story, to talk about your life experience.
Uh-huh.
You know, that's really great. And I mean, obviously, for me, I was able to tell my story as well on the podcast, and so I know the feeling of it's like you get it out there, and you're like, cool, like I've been heard now. Like officially.
Exactly.
Our spouses and our close friends have heard the story or bits and pieces of the story, but this is a chance to kind of summarize the whole thing and kind of go through. It is a milestone. That's really cool.
Yeah. So I'm thankful for this, being able to speak with you and all of that.
Yeah. Well, I started this podcast for recently deconverted Christians. What encouragement or piece of guidance can you give them?
Well, I just keep drilling what I've been drilling before. If you feel guilt, fear, and shame, that's not okay. You don't need to, quote, get right with God. You don't, quote, need to pray for more faith. You don't, quote, need to read the Bible more. If you're seeking help and these are the only kinds of pieces of advice you're getting, it's not okay. You're good enough as you are. You don't have to be afraid. If you have guilt, fear, and shame, it's not okay. You are good as you are. Don't be afraid. Just be who you are. You're not going to hell.
That's great advice. And finally, can you name one resource you would recommend for someone who's deconverting from Christianity?
Let's see. There is you may have heard Ryan Bell. He's the Seventh-day Adventist pastor who took a, quote, year without God, and he is now atheist. And he has a Facebook group, and it's basically the Life After God members group. There's a public site that they have, but then they also have a closed group. And that's a group where, what is said there stays there. And people can share their stories and encourage each other. Sometimes they can be irreverent, and that's a good thing too. It's not just a place for memes and things like that, but there's that. But I would encourage anybody to find either something like that or some kind of forum, something so that they know they're not alone. A lot of people, I've heard them say, this forum or this group is the only thing I have.
Wow.
So many people, they live in a culture, a family, their job, their community. It's all God all the time, or they feel afraid they can't speak how they really want to speak. Find something that will let you speak out. And it will, if nothing else, if all you do is sit there and read other people's stories, if you're uncomfortable sharing yours, that's fine too. You'll know that you're not alone.
Yeah, that's huge. Those communities are a big deal,
Uh-huh. I wish I had that. I hadn't spent all my time in the library taking books home. Had I, had the internet, I would have been able to tap into that too. So don't take that for granted.
Well, and a lot of these groups, Recovering from Religion, Ryan Bell's group and his podcast, all this stuff has kind of come in the last, I don't know, like 5 years, it feels like. It's really been recent. Sunday Assembly, for instance, it's less than 5 years old. I mean, these resources didn't always exist. So the awesome thing is that people are creating them. People are creating the online communities, the in-person communities, the books, the podcasts, whatever. So it's a great, I guess there's never been a better time to lose your faith or to become atheist or agnostic, because there's so many great resources out there. So hearing some people say, it's all I have, it's the only thing, only place I can talk about it, that's huge. That's so important to have even just one place you can go and just be yourself. Just let it out. Tell people what you're feeling, what you're going through, how hard it is. Tell an irreverent joke here and there to let off some steam and just vent. Otherwise, you keep it all inside, and that's hard to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and the irreverent jokes are good. You won't get struck by lightning. I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to get struck by lightning if I say this, but yeah.
It won't happen.
You're right.
Well, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, you can write me an email, martymcdonald@outlook.com. MartyMcDonald@outlook.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, Marty, thanks again. This was the third time's a charm. So this was our third attempt. Had some technical difficulties the first two times on my end. So thank you for being so patient and willing to stick in there and wait until I got everything kind of worked out. So it's been really great hearing your story, and I know it's going to really encourage a lot of people. So thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing it with us.
Thank you, Steve. You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, check out our newsletter at bodpodcast.com.